He left the city and bought a house by a quiet lake to start his life over. But every time the water rose, he heard someone calling his name. And one day he realized that what he had been running from his whole life was hidden beneath his house. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are watching from. The air in northern Maine had a heaviness that wasn't just humidity. It was memory. The kind of stillness that seemed to hold on to every sound, every breath, every whisper of wind through the trees. When Michael Rhodes first arrived at the lake that spring, he thought the silence was peace. Later, he would learn that it was something closer to mourning. The locals called it Dead Mirror. From the distance, the water shone with a strange metallic sheen, smooth as oil, never rippling even when the wind passed over it. There were no birds in the sky above it, no frogs in the reeds. It was as though life itself had drawn a boundary around the lake and decided never to cross it again. Michael's cabin stood on stilts above the water, an old fishing hut someone had built decades ago and abandoned after the chemical plant nearby shut down. It was connected to the shore by a long wooden bridge made of uneven planks. At its middle, a portion could be raised by a simple pulley system, an old fisherman's trick to keep animals from wandering across. Michael used it every evening, lifting the bridge until it stood upright like a barricade. He told himself it was for safety, but in truth, it was something else, a ritual of isolation. When the bridge rose, it felt as if the rest of the world disappeared with it. He had come here to disappear, after all. The scandal at the university had burned through his career in a matter of weeks. Years of research, published papers, and peer recognition, all gone. A colleague, once a friend, and something more, had accused him of data manipulation. The truth was complicated. He had adjusted figures to protect a study from corporate interference, hoping to reveal the extent of chemical contamination before the funding board shut it down. But no one cared about his reasons. They saw numbers, not conscience. He left Boston one night without saying goodbye to anyone, his name already tarnished, his grant revoked, his silence mistaken for guilt. Now, he lived alone in this hut with only his old black Labrador Ash for company. Each morning followed the same pattern. He would rise before dawn, boil water from a filtered jug, pour a cup of black coffee, and step outside to record temperature readings. The dock creaked beneath his feet, and the lake stared back, reflecting a pale sky. He still took notes with the precision of a scientist. Water pH, nitrate levels, signs of organic decay. He kept everything in a weathered journal, its pages smudged with graphite and moisture. Habit was the only thing that kept him from dissolving into the stillness. The locals didn't come near the lake. When he drove into town for supplies every 2 weeks, the clerk at the general store would glance at him and say nothing, but his eyes always followed him to the door. Once, an old man mumbled something like, "If you hear it breathe, don't look at it," and laughed with no humor at all. Michael didn't ask what that meant. He'd learned that questions here led nowhere. The days were slow and quiet, but not empty. He wrote in his journal about the strange readings, mercury levels that fluctuated wildly, as if something beneath the surface was stirring the sediment, organic samples that degraded faster than they should have. Every few nights the lake would exhale, a low gurgle, bubbles rising like the last breath of something deep below. Ash would raise his head, ears pricked, a soft growl rumbling in his chest. At first, Michael thought the solitude was healing him. But solitude can ferment guilt, and his was thick and unfiltered. He began to dream again of conference rooms filled with indifferent faces, of his mentor's voice asking, "What have you done, Michael?" He woke before dawn, sweating, gripping the edge of the cot as though to keep from sliding back into that courtroom of memory. One afternoon, after a long trip to town, he noticed something odd. A can of beans he was sure he had left on the shelf was gone. He shrugged it off. Perhaps he'd eaten it and forgotten. A week later, a flashlight vanished from his workbench, then a pack of batteries. Nothing valuable, but enough to disturb him. The cabin was small. There were no locked doors, only a simple latch. It didn't seem possible that anyone could cross the bridge unnoticed, especially since he always raised it before leaving. Unless, of course, someone came when it was down. He checked the bridge carefully. There were faint prints on the damp planks, too small to be adult feet. For a moment he thought of children, but there were no families living near the lake. The nearest village was 3 miles away. Perhaps hunters, he told himself. Or his imagination. That night he sat by the lantern, listening. The wind brushed the roof. Water lapped softly against the stilts. Somewhere far out on the lake came a faint splash, followed by another. Ash stood, ears tilted forward, growling. Michael stepped onto the porch, the night air cold against his face. Across the lake, faint shapes moved between the trees, shadows against shadows. He waited, heart thudding. Then came something he hadn't heard in months, a short, high laugh, unmistakably human, unmistakably young. He called out, but the sound died on the water. Only the echo answered. When morning came, he found a small glass jar placed neatly on the bridge railing. It was empty except for a dead dragonfly, its wings caught in the dried residue at the bottom. The jar had been cleaned, its lid tightened carefully, like a gift or a warning. He examined it for fingerprints, but found none. He kept it on the shelf anyway, unsure why. Perhaps because it was proof that the silence wasn't complete, that the world beyond the bridge still existed, watching him. As days passed, more little things began to change. The fishing line he never used was tangled, as if someone had handled it. A chair was slightly moved. Footprints appeared again, smaller, lighter, leading to the water's edge and back. Each discovery pulled at his nerves until he began sleeping with a small hammer under his cot. He wrote in his journal, "It's not animals. The pattern is deliberate, curious, observant." But curiosity was not foreign to him. It was his own nature reflected back. He began to wonder what kind of children, if any, would dare come here. The stories about the lake were enough to keep even adults away. If they were real, what were they looking for? The thought gnawed at him. He had lived so long surrounded by instruments, graphs, and logic that he had forgotten how to interpret human signs. And yet, each clue felt intentional. The dragonfly jar, the footprints, the missing items, all pieces of some quiet dialogue he didn't yet understand. One night, as the wind rose and the forest bent under the weight of an approaching storm, he dreamed again. In the dream, he was back in the university's laboratory. The floor was covered with murky water, and beakers floated like drowned fish. From the far end of the room, his former colleague, Emily Clark, was watching him. "You wanted the truth," she said, her voice echoing through the empty lab, "and look where it brought you." He woke with a start, the storm now real, the rain pounding on the roof. Ash barked at something outside. Lightning flashed, and for an instant, he saw movement near the bridge, a figure darting across before the next strike blinded him. Michael ran out barefoot, rain slapping his skin, but the bridge was empty. Only the water churned below. He lowered the lantern close to the planks. There, half washed by rain, was a footprint, again, small, human. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, when the rain stopped and mist curled over the surface of the lake, he found the jar again, this time filled with lake water, cloudy and smelling faintly of metal. The lid was screwed tight, and a folded scrap of paper was taped to it. The writing was barely legible. "It's sick." He turned the words over and over in his hands. There was no other explanation now. Someone was watching the same water he was. Someone who saw the same sickness. But who? And why steal from him? Why not knock, speak, ask? He began leaving the bridge down more often, as if inviting whatever was out there to come. He sat outside in the evenings, pretending to read, the dog beside him. But no one came again. The silence returned, heavier than before. In his notes, he wrote, "An ecosystem doesn't die quietly. It leaves signs, traces of struggle. I think people are the same." He didn't yet realize that he had already become part of the lake's ecosystem, drawn into its decay and mystery. The days shortened. The air turned colder, sharper, filled with the smell of wet leaves. Michael gathered firewood and told himself he would leave before winter. But he knew he wouldn't. Something about this place had taken hold of him. The unanswered questions, the feeling that beneath the silence, the lake was whispering truths no one wanted to hear. That night, as he watched the water shimmer under a rising moon, he whispered, almost without meaning to, "Who are you?" The answer came not from the darkness, but from his own chest, a hollow ache that reminded him how long it had been since he had spoken to anyone without fear of being misunderstood. Ash rested his head on his lap, and together they sat in that stillness, man and dog, waiting for something neither of them could name. In the reflection of the moon on the water, Michael thought he saw the faint outline of faces, just beneath the surface, watching him. When he blinked, they were gone. The next morning he woke early, made coffee, and found that the bridge had been lowered. He was certain he had raised it the night before. The pulley rope was wet, not from dew, but from hands. Someone had been here again. He stood at the edge of the bridge, looking toward the forest where mist still hung low, and felt something stir inside him. Not fear, but a reluctant recognition. Whoever had crossed the bridge was not his enemy. They were searching for something, just as he once had. He looked out at the lake, its surface now dull and gray under the morning light. Somewhere beneath that surface, he knew, something poisonous still moved, unseen. But above it, somewhere beyond the trees, were those children, or whatever they were, who had dared to cross the line he thought he had drawn forever. For the first time in months, Michael Rhodes felt that his solitude was cracking. The silence that had protected him was now only a fragile skin stretched over something alive and waiting. And though he didn't yet know it, the next time he saw those small footprints, he would follow them, and nothing about the lake or himself would remain the same. The mist was still hanging over the lake when Michael awoke the next morning. He hadn't slept well. Every sound in the night had seemed amplified, the creak of wood, the lapping of water, the quiet whisper of the wind against the windows. The image of the lowered bridge haunted him. He had checked the latch twice before going to bed, and yet when dawn came, the bridge had been down, slick with moisture that wasn't from rain. The idea that someone had crossed while he slept unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Ash was restless too, pacing near the door, growling softly at the forest. Michael poured himself a mug of coffee and sat by the window, watching the fog dissolve. Across the gray water, the trees stood still and silent, their reflection trembling faintly on the surface. He tried to convince himself that everything he'd seen, the footprints, the jar, the movement at night, had an explanation, a human one. Maybe kids from the nearby village came here for dares. Maybe some drifter wandered through. But the way the jar had been placed, the note that read, "It's sick," that wasn't mischief. It was intention. By mid-morning, he made up his mind. If someone was coming here, he would find out who. He packed a small bag, filled a thermos, and walked to the tree line, marking his steps carefully in the mud. The path from his cabin wound upward through the pines before reaching the dirt road that led toward the village. It was only 3 miles, but in the thick stillness, it felt much farther. The town was small, no more than 30 houses scattered along the main road, most with peeling paint and overgrown yards. The old general store stood near the gas pump that no longer worked. Inside, the air smelled of dust, and the man behind the counter didn't look surprised to see him. "Back for supplies?" the man asked. "Not today," Michael replied. "I wanted to ask. There are kids around here, right?" "Teenagers, maybe?" The clerk raised an eyebrow. "Kids?" He scratched his beard. "Not many left. Folks moved away when the jobs dried up. You get a few families still hanging on." "Why?" Michael hesitated, then said, "Someone's been out by the lake, near my place. Small footprints. They left a note." The clerk's face shifted, a flicker of discomfort. "You mean Dead Mirror Lake?" "Yes," the man sighed. "Nobody goes near that water." "Not anymore." Then, after a pause, "Well, there's the Ross kids. Live up by the ridge. Their daddy worked the plant before it closed. Hard times since. The oldest one, Sam, helps at the lumber yard sometimes. The little ones, don't see them much." Michael thanked him and left, but the man's last words followed him. "You stay careful, mister. That place brings nothing good." By afternoon, clouds gathered low and a fine drizzle began to fall. When he returned to the cabin, he decided to test a theory. He left the bridge down deliberately, placed his journal in plain sight on the table near the window, and took his old camping jacket from the hook. Then he climbed down the ladder from the stilts and slipped into the tall reeds by the shore, hiding himself between the cattails. It didn't take long. Near sunset, the forest across the lake stirred. 3 small figures emerged, moving cautiously along the bridge. They were exactly as he had imagined. Children, no older than 14. The boy leading them carried a flashlight, though it was still light enough to see. Behind him, a girl clutched a worn backpack, and a smaller boy followed barefoot, stepping on the wood with care. Michael's heart thudded. He watched as they crossed the bridge and climbed the short stairs to his door. They hesitated, listening. Then the older boy pushed it open and went inside. A few seconds later, the girl followed. The smallest one lingered on the porch, glancing around nervously. When they didn't come out after several minutes, Michael stepped quietly from the reeds. Ash stayed behind, silent. He moved across the bridge, each plank giving a faint sigh under his weight. When he reached the porch, he could hear the whisper of voices from within. He opened the door. The children froze. The boy spun around, holding Michael's journal in both hands. The girl gasped, pulling the smaller one behind her. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Michael said, his voice low but steady, "Put it down." The boy did. His expression wasn't fear, exactly. It was defiance. "We're not stealing," he said quickly. "We just wanted to read it." "Who are you?" "Sam Ross," the boy answered. "This is my sister Ellie, and that's Josh. We just wanted to see if it's true, if you're really the man who worked for the university." Michael studied them. They were thin, pale, dressed in worn clothes. Sam's hair was tangled, his face streaked with mud. Ellie's eyes were bright but wary. Josh clung to her sleeve, coughing softly. "You shouldn't be here," Michael said. "This lake isn't safe." "We know," Sam said. "That's why we came." He gestured toward the water. "It's killing everything. Our animals, the wells, even the trees. Mom says it's the same sickness that took Dad, but nobody listens." Michael frowned. "Your father worked at the plant?" Sam nodded. "Before it shut down, he used to say they buried things out there, said the water wasn't right. Then he got sick. After he died, Mom found some papers, but they took them away when she tried to show them in town." The girl stepped forward. "We found your name online. You wrote about chemicals, about mercury and dioxins. We thought you might know what to do." Michael felt the words hit like stones. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. All the years of running, of pretending the past was gone, came back in their voices. "I can't help you," he said finally. "I'm not who you think I am." "That's not true," Sam said. "You came here for a reason. You're testing the water, right? You've got the equipment." Michael turned away, angry at the boy's certainty. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." "Maybe not," Sam said quietly. "But you do." The silence stretched until Ellie spoke again, her voice trembling. "If you won't help, we'll find out ourselves." She picked up the journal from the table, but instead of taking it, she flipped it open. "You already wrote it down. The levels are rising. It's getting worse." Michael grabbed the journal from her hands. "Enough. Leave." Sam's eyes burned. "We just wanted someone to believe us." When they left, the room felt emptier than before. Outside, their footsteps echoed on the bridge, then vanished into the forest. Michael stood at the window long after they were gone, staring at the faint ripples where their reflections had been. That night, he couldn't concentrate. He kept replaying their words. "We thought you might know what to do." It had been years since anyone expected anything from him. He'd spent so long proving nothing to anyone but himself that he'd forgotten how responsibility felt. When he finally went to bed, he found something under the door. A folded note, written in pencil on a torn page. "If you won't help, the lake will take all of us." He sat with it for a long time, then placed it beside the jar with the dragonfly. Two relics of the living world pressing in on his isolation. By morning, he had decided to test the wells himself. He packed vials, gloves, a small field kit, and walked along the northern bank. The air smelled of rot. The soil near the water was slick and oily. When he reached a small homestead, an abandoned farm at the edge of the forest, he found an old well still covered by a wooden lid. He lowered a jar, drew up water, and sealed it. The sample shimmered faintly green in the light. Back in the cabin, he examined it under his makeshift lamp. The readings shocked him. The contamination was far higher than expected. Mercury, arsenic, and other compounds that should have broken down decades ago. Something was still feeding the poison. He stared at the numbers, his stomach twisting. The children had been right. That night, he sat outside, looking toward the opposite shore. A bright beam flickered among the trees, sweeping across the water. He watched as it paused, aimed downward, then moved again. The faint hum of machinery drifted across the lake. It sounded like pumps. Someone was still operating there, someone trying to hide the source. He grabbed his binoculars and adjusted the focus. Through the blur of mist, he saw the outline of a truck near the water's edge, hoses snaking into the ground. The hum grew louder, then stopped abruptly. The light went out. Ash whined beside him. Michael whispered, "You saw that too." The next morning, he walked into the village again, but when he mentioned what he'd seen, no one wanted to talk. The store clerk only shook his head. "Don't go stirring things up, mister. Some ghosts around here don't like to be named." On his way back, Michael stopped at the Ross house, a sagging structure near the ridge. The door opened before he could knock. Ellie stood there, pale and wary. Behind her, Sam's voice came from inside. "I told you he'd come." They invited him in. The house smelled of damp wood and sickness. Their mother lay in bed in the next room, her breathing shallow, the skin on her hands mottled gray. Michael felt the old ache of guilt tighten his throat. He took a small sample of water from their jug, pretending it was for his own curiosity, but he already knew what he would find. When he left, Sam followed him to the porch. "We found something," he said, "near the old plant. There's a tunnel by the hill, It's blocked, but there's air coming out, like something's still down there. Michael hesitated. Stay away from it. Promise me. Sam didn't answer. If no one stops it, it'll kill everything, he said. Even the lake. That night, as the wind rose again, Michael felt a pressure in the air, a storm building not from weather, but from consequence. He sat by the fire, the children's faces still in his mind, and knew the quiet could no longer protect him. Just before midnight, the explosion came. A deep, muffled roar rolled beneath the earth, shaking the cabin. Glass shattered, and Ash barked wildly. Michael stumbled to the window. Across the lake, an orange glow spread like a wound under the surface. Steam rose in columns, the water bubbling violently. The smell hit him next. Acrid, metallic, sulfurous. He covered his mouth, realizing what it meant. The underground tanks had ruptured, or someone had made them rupture. He ran outside, rain and smoke mixing in the air, the bridge trembling under his feet. The sound of the lake was deafening now, a churning, boiling roar. In the distance, he thought he heard voices, children shouting, but the wind tore them away. By dawn, the glow had faded, leaving only a sickly haze above the water. Ash whined at the door, his fur matted with soot. The air was thick, poisonous. Michael's throat burned. He tried calling out, but the echo died before it reached the trees. The children were gone. The forest was silent again. For hours he sat on the porch, staring at the stillness returning to the water. It looked calm once more, a deceptive calm, as if the lake had simply swallowed what had disturbed it. He knew better. Beneath that surface, something monstrous had woken. He lowered his head into his hands. The note from Sam lay on the table beside him, fluttering in the wind from the broken window. "If you won't help, the lake will take all of us," he whispered hoarsely. "Then I'll go to it." And when night fell again, Michael Rhodes prepared to cross the bridge, not to escape, but to follow the only trail left. Somewhere beyond the trees, near the buried bones of the chemical plant, 3 children had vanished, and the truth he'd run from his entire life was waiting for him underground. The night that followed the explosion felt longer than any Michael could remember. The air was thick, metallic, and wrong, as though the world itself had been bruised. Smoke hovered low over the lake, turning the moon into a pale coin behind the haze. Ash lay beside the door, refusing to sleep, his ears twitching at every sound. Michael hadn't spoken since the blast. He sat on the porch until dawn, eyes fixed on the other shore, waiting for movement, for the sight of a child's silhouette among the trees. None came. The water looked calm again, deceptively still, but the color of it had changed. It was no longer gray. Now it glowed faintly green, as if something beneath was breathing in the dark. When morning came, a fine ash coated everything, the roof, the bridge, his hands. He tasted it when he breathed. It wasn't the soft ash of fire, but something sharper, chemical, bitter. He knew what it meant. The explosion hadn't burned fuel or wood. It had ruptured something older, something buried. He thought of Sam's words. "There's a tunnel by the hill. It's blocked, but there's air coming out." Maybe the kids had gone there. Maybe they'd tried to uncover what their father once spoke of. Maybe they were the cause of it. Or maybe someone else had been down there, hiding the truth they stumbled upon. He couldn't sit still. The guilt was a living thing inside him now. Every minute he waited felt like betrayal. When the sun finally cut through the haze, he packed a bag. Water, flashlight, gloves, his old respirator from the university lab, and called Ash to follow. The dog hesitated at the bridge, sniffing the planks, whining softly. The smell of the lake was unbearable now. It was no longer the faint odor of rot and algae, but something acidic, like batteries left to corrode in the rain. Michael crouched beside the dog and whispered, "I know, boy, but they're out there. We can't leave them." The forest was silent. Even the insects had gone. He walked slowly, marking his path through the damp undergrowth, until he reached the ridge where the Ross family's old house stood. The windows were dark. He knocked, but no one answered. Inside, the air was stale, and the mother's bed was empty. The sheet still carried the shape of her body, but the room was cold. He found a glass of water on the nightstand, untouched. He poured it into a vial and watched it shimmer, oily in the light. The contamination was everywhere now. At the back of the property, behind a line of dead pines, he found what he was looking for, a patch of disturbed soil near a rusted metal cover half buried in the ground. The air coming through the cracks was hot and foul, carrying a smell like burning rubber and iron. The remnants of small footprints led to it and vanished. He pulled away the debris, revealing the mouth of an old maintenance shaft. Inside was darkness, a blackness so thick it seemed to have substance. He lowered his flashlight. The beam hit metal rungs descending into the earth. He hesitated only once. There was still time to walk away, to pretend he hadn't seen it. But that time had passed years ago, in a different laboratory, under fluorescent lights, when he'd chosen to alter a report instead of exposing the truth. The line he'd crossed back then had led here, to this poisoned ground, to these missing children. The bridge he'd built to isolate himself had only been a delay, not an escape. He adjusted the respirator, tightened the straps of his backpack, and began to climb down. The ladder went deeper than he expected. The air grew heavier with every step, pressing against his lungs, even through the mask. At last, he reached the bottom, a tunnel reinforced with corroded steel beams, water dripping from above, in a slow, irregular rhythm. The ground was coated in sludge that glowed faintly when his flashlight passed over it. The walls were lined with pipes, many ruptured, some still leaking a viscous fluid that steamed as it touched the air. The sound of the world above had vanished. He called out once, "Sam!" The echo came back distorted, too long, as if the tunnel itself were repeating his voice. Then, faintly, a cough. He followed the sound, moving deeper through the passage. It branched several times, each path leading into darker, narrower corridors. Symbols were painted on the walls, warnings, faded decades ago. He recognized the old Rothwell Industries emblem, half covered by grime. When he brushed it with his sleeve, letters appeared beneath. Waste Vault 3B. His stomach turned. He had seen similar schematics once, in the files that mysteriously disappeared after the university's audit. The plant had claimed to neutralize its waste before storage, but these tunnels told another story. They had buried the poison instead of curing it. The coughing came again, louder now. He turned a corner and found them. Sam was sitting against a collapsed beam, his face streaked with soot, one arm wrapped around his little brother, who lay still, breathing shallowly. Ellie knelt beside them, her eyes red, her hands shaking as she tried to pour water from a cracked bottle into Josh's mouth. When she saw Michael, she froze, then whispered, "I knew you'd come." He dropped to his knees beside them. "How long have you been here?" "Since last night," Sam said hoarsely. "We tried to find the tanks. We thought we could take pictures, show people. But there was a noise, like something shifting. Then it blew. We ran, but the smoke—" He broke off, coughing again. The boy's skin was pale and blistered around his mouth. Michael checked Josh's pulse. It was faint but steady. He took off his jacket and wrapped it around him. "We're getting out of here," he said. "No," Sam said. "You have to see it first." He pointed deeper into the tunnel. "It's still leaking. It never stopped. Dad was right. Michael followed his gaze. The tunnel ahead was flooded with a slow-moving river of black sludge, pulsing as if alive. Steam rose from it, filling the air with a chemical fog. Beyond the mist, something massive loomed, a rusted storage tank split down the middle, its contents seeping into the soil. On the tank's side was a serial number, and below it, the signature of a safety inspector. His own. For a moment, everything went silent inside him. He remembered the day he signed those papers, the pressure from the board, the threats of funding withdrawal. He'd told himself it was temporary, that he would expose them later. But later had become never. His name had sealed the vault of this place, and now the children paid for it. Ellie touched his arm. "Can you stop it?" He looked at her and realized how small she was, how much courage it took to crawl into this grave. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but we need to get you out first." He helped them toward the ladder, guiding Sam as he stumbled. Halfway there, the ground shook, a deep tremor that sent dust cascading from above. One of the sidewalls groaned, metal tearing. "Run!" Michael shouted. They reached the base of the ladder just as the tunnel behind them collapsed with a roar, filling the air with choking dust. When they finally climbed into the daylight, the world seemed too bright, too loud. The smoke from the lake had spread across the valley. The surface boiled in places, releasing waves of yellow steam. The forest was silent, the birds gone. Michael laid Josh on the ground, checked his breathing again. It was shallow but steady. Sam sat nearby, staring blankly at the horizon. "It's all poison," he murmured. "Even the air." Michael knew he was right. They wouldn't survive long if they stayed. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small transmitter, an old satellite beacon he'd kept from his field expeditions years ago. He connected it to his phone, praying it still had power. The signal light blinked weakly. "What's that?" Ellie asked. "Proof," he said. He opened his notebook and began to write quickly, his hands trembling. Coordinates, contamination levels, the serial number on the tank, and his confession. He attached a few photos from his phone, the ruptured vault, the dead water, the children's faces. Then he activated the transmitter. A red light blinked once, then twice, then steady green. The data began to send. Behind them, the ground rumbled again. A low, groaning sound rose from beneath the earth, followed by a distant explosion. Michael turned in time to see fire blooming along the far shore, spreading through the forest as gas ignited. The lake reflected it all, a mirror of flame. "Go!" he shouted. He lifted Josh into his arms, motioning for Sam and Ellie to run. They stumbled toward the woods, coughing, covering their mouths. He followed until they reached the old road. "Don't stop," he told them. "Head toward town. Find help." "What about you?" Sam's voice cracked. "I'll make sure the message goes through." Ellie's eyes filled with tears. "You'll die if you stay." Michael managed a faint smile. "I already did once." He handed her his notebook. "Keep this safe. People will believe you now." She nodded, clutching it to her chest. Then she turned and ran with her brothers down the road, disappearing into the smoke. When he turned back toward the lake, the fire was spreading fast, flames racing across the oily water. The air burned his throat even through the mask. He stumbled to the edge of the bridge, which was already smoldering, and sat down. Ash appeared from the trees, limping, fur singed. The dog laid his head on Michael's knee, trembling. "It's all right," Michael whispered. "We did what we could." He watched the transmitter's light blink steadily. The signal had gone out. Somewhere, data was being received. Numbers, coordinates, evidence. Enough to expose everything. Enough to end Rothwell Industries, or what was left of it. He thought of Emily, his old colleague. and wondered if she would read about this in a paper and finally understand. The heat grew unbearable. The wooden stilts of the cabin cracked and collapsed into the boiling water. The smell of burning chemicals filled the air. Ash whimpered once, then went still beside him. Michael lifted his eyes to the horizon, where the fire met the sky, and whispered, "I'm sorry." When the flames reached the bridge, he didn't move. He felt the boards give way beneath him, the plunge into the scalding water. The last thing he saw before the darkness closed was the transmitter's light blinking green against the smoke-filled sky. Weeks passed before the fires were extinguished. The area was declared a disaster zone. The lake was sealed off, the surrounding forest evacuated. Journalists came, scientists came, and soon the story spread. Illegal dumping, decades of cover-ups, falsified reports. Among the evidence found near the shore was a notebook, its pages water-stained but legible, filled with confessions and data. The name signed at the bottom became a headline across the country. Michael Rhodes, former university researcher, whistleblower found dead after exposing chemical scandal. Months later, when the government teams left and the fences went up, two figures returned quietly, a teenage boy and a girl, standing at the edge of what had once been the bridge. Between them, they carried a small wooden sign carved from a fallen beam. They planted it into the soft mud near the shore. It read, "Here the lake died, but it taught us not to stay silent." Ellie brushed the dirt from her hands. Sam stood beside her, looking at the still water. "Do you think he knew it would end like this?" he asked. "Yes," she said softly, "but he stayed anyway." They stood there for a while, the silence stretching between them. Then Ellie took a strip of red cloth from her pocket, the same one she had found tied to the bridge railing weeks earlier, and tied it to the post. The wind caught it, making it flutter gently above the poisoned lake. In the distance, the water shimmered faintly in the evening light. Beneath its surface, no fish moved, no plants grew. But for the first time in years, the sound of a single bird's cry echoed across the valley. The silence had been broken, and though the land was lost, the truth had surfaced. Far below, where the tunnels collapsed into darkness, the last bubbles of air escaped, rising to the surface like a sigh. The lake swallowed them and went still again, its mirror smooth and perfect. But on its shore, that small red ribbon kept waving, whispering in the wind, a promise that even in ruin, some voices never drown. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more real stories. Watch the next video, share this one with your friends, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from.